You never expect betrayal to come from the people closest to you. That's the thing about trust, it makes you vulnerable in ways you can't anticipate. I always thought if my life ever fell apart, it would be because of something external, money problems, an accident, or bad luck. I never imagined the wrecking ball would be my wife, Lauren, and my brother, Adam. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that should have been uneventful. The smell of coffee and Lauren's blueberry pancakes filled the house, warm and comforting, like every other weekend morning we'd shared for years. I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through the mail, while Lauren hummed along to some pop song playing softly in the background. Adam had dropped by out of the blue, as he often did, claiming he just happened to be nearby. Adam poured himself a cup of coffee without asking, as if he owned the place. "These pancakes smell amazing," he said, leaning against the counter with that familiar cocky grin of his. Lauren turned to him, smiling back in a way that, looking back, felt just a little too familiar. She teased him about always showing up hungry and flicked a few drops of pancake batter at him with the spatula. He laughed, and for a second, I felt a strange pang in my gut. I brushed it off. It was just banter between my wife and my brother, nothing more. As they carried on, I focused on sorting the pile of mail, bills, junk flyers, the usual clutter, but then, at the bottom of the stack, I noticed a plain white envelope. My name was written across the front in messy, unfamiliar handwriting. No return address, nothing to indicate where it had come from. I almost tossed it aside, thinking it was probably junk mail, but something about it gave me pause. Curiosity got the better of me. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a single photo. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. The image was grainy, like it had been taken with a bad camera or through a dirty window, but as I focused on the faces, my stomach dropped. It was unmistakable, Lauren and Adam. They were wrapped around each other, their bodies pressed together in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Adam's face was buried in her neck, his hand gripping her waist like he couldn't bear to let go. Her fingers were tangled in his hair, her head tilted back, eyes closed. A timestamp in the corner told me all I needed to know. Last Friday night. Last Friday, Lauren had told me she'd be working late, an emergency project at the office she couldn't get out of. Adam had mentioned he was meeting some friends for a poker game. I hadn't questioned either of them. Why would I? They were my wife and my brother, the two people I trusted most in the world. I stared at the photo, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were telling me. Who had sent this? Why? And how long had this been going on behind my back? Downstairs, their laughter broke through my haze. Lauren was flipping pancakes, her voice light and carefree. Adam said something I couldn't hear, and she laughed, the kind of laugh that once felt like home to me. Now, it sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. "I'll be right back," I muttered, pushing my chair away from the table. My voice sounded distant, like it didn't belong to me. Neither of them seemed to notice as I walked upstairs, clutching the photo in my hand. Once I was in our bedroom, I shut the door and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the picture again. It didn't matter how many times I looked at it, the betrayal hit just as hard every time. This wasn't a trick of the light or a misunderstanding. The way they held each other in that photo was raw, desperate, and far too intimate. How could they do this to me? How long had this been happening? And how could they stand there in my kitchen, acting like nothing was wrong? Every conversation, every shared moment over the past few months suddenly felt tainted. I thought about last Friday night. Lauren had kissed me on her way out the door, telling me not to wait up. And Adam, he'd sent me a text around 10 p.m. Some joke about the poker game. It had seemed normal at the time. Now, it made me sick. The weight of it all settled on my chest, suffocating me. My wife, my brother, together, and downstairs, they were still laughing. I stayed in that room longer than I'd meant to. Every time I thought I'd pieced my emotions together, shock, rage, humiliation, something else bubbled to the surface. A memory, a moment I'd brushed off, now twisted into something sinister. Lauren and Adam's banter, the times she defended him when I got annoyed with his arrogance, the way his hand lingered on her shoulder when he said goodbye. How had I missed it? By the time I went back downstairs, I'd convinced myself I could handle this without making a scene. Confrontation wasn't my style. I needed clarity before I tore everything apart. But as I stepped into the kitchen and saw them standing there, laughing over something stupid, the photo in my pocket burned like a brand. "Hey, what took you so long?" Adam asked, tossing a crumpled napkin onto the table. He smirked, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. "Don't tell me you're hiding from my wit and charm again." Lauren chuckled, carrying a plate of pancakes to the table. "You know he can't handle you before coffee," she teased, ruffling my hair as she passed. Her touch, once comforting, felt like a violation now. I sat down, forcing a smile, and sipped the lukewarm coffee in front of me. "So, What were you two talking about while I was upstairs? Lauren hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate. Adam, on the other hand, didn't miss a beat. Just catching up, he said casually. You know, work stuff, family stuff, the usual. I nodded, pretending to take another sip. Funny, I feel like I'm missing a lot these days. That got Lauren's attention. Her eyes darted toward mine, just for a second, before she focused on cutting her pancake. What do you mean? Nothing, I said, leaning back in my chair. It's just that people send you the strangest things in the mail, like photos. Adam stiffened. It was subtle, but I caught it, the slight pause before he reached for his coffee, the way his fingers tightened around the mug. Lauren didn't flinch, though. She just kept cutting her pancake into perfect little squares. What kind of photos? She asked, her voice even, too even. Oh, you know, I said, my tone light and conversational, the kind that make you realize your wife and your brother might have more in common than you thought. The room went silent. The only sound was the clink of Lauren's fork as it hit her plate. Adam looked at me, his smirk gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. What are you talking about, Nate? He asked, his voice a low growl. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo, sliding it across the table. This, I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. Recognize it? Lauren's face went pale. She didn't even try to look at the photo. Adam, on the other hand, grabbed it and stared at it like he was trying to figure out who'd sent it. After a long moment, he looked up, his expression hard. Where the hell did you get this? Does it matter? I asked, my voice sharp. The better question is, how long has this been going on? Lauren finally looked up, her eyes wide and glistening. Nate, save it, I snapped, my anger boiling over. I don't want excuses. I don't want lies. I just want the truth. Adam leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like he was gearing up for a fight. All right, he said, his tone almost dismissive. You want the truth? Fine. It's been a few months. His words hit like a punch to the gut. I turned to Lauren, hoping she'd deny it, say he was lying, anything, but she just sat there, staring at her plate, tears streaming down her face. A few months, I repeated, my voice shaking. You've been sneaking around with my wife for a few months. Adam shrugged, as if it were no big deal. Look, Nate, I'm not proud of it, okay, but you don't know what it's like, being around her, seeing how unhappy she is with you. One thing led to another. Lauren sobbed quietly, still refusing to meet my eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. It just did. Unhappy, I spat, ignoring her. My attention was locked on Adam. You think that justifies this? You think that makes it okay to destroy your brother's marriage? Adam didn't respond. He just stared at me, his jaw tight, like he was waiting for me to lash out, but I didn't. Not yet. I looked at Lauren, my voice breaking. Why? Why him? Why not talk to me if you were so miserable? She shook her head, her words barely audible. I don't know, Nate, I don't know. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood, pushing my chair back so hard it nearly toppled over. You don't know, I said, my voice rising. That's all you've got, after everything. Neither of them said a word as I grabbed my keys and stormed out of the house. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that room with them, pretending this was something I could forgive. The truth was out now, but it wasn't enough, not yet. I drove aimlessly for hours, my knuckles white as I gripped the steering wheel. Anger churned in my chest, but beneath it was something far worse, an aching, hollow kind of sadness. How had I been so blind? Lauren and Adam had turned my life into a joke, and I'd been the last one to get the punchline. I pulled into the parking lot of a random diner off the highway, my head throbbing. The fluorescent sign buzzed faintly as I walked in and slid into a booth in the corner. A waitress brought me coffee, and I stared at the swirling black liquid like it held answers. The photo sat folded in my pocket, a grotesque reminder of the morning that had shattered everything. As the caffeine began to dull the edges of my exhaustion, a thought crept into my mind. Who sent the photo? Adam hadn't seemed surprised by what was in it, but he definitely hadn't expected me to have it. Lauren's reaction had been different. Guilt, panic, and shame rolled into one. Neither of them had been prepared. So who had exposed them? I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts. I wasn't ready to go home yet, not with Lauren and Adam still there, but I needed more answers before I could figure out what came next. The first person I called was Sarah, a mutual friend of Lauren's and mine. She was the kind of friend who knew everything about everyone, and I figured if she'd heard any rumors, she wouldn't hold back. Hey, Nate, Sarah answered, her tone light. What's up? You sound tense. I hesitated. Yeah, it's been a rough day. Can I ask you something? Of course, she said, her voice softening. Has Lauren ever mentioned anything unusual about Adam? Like, has she ever seemed closer to him than she should be? I winced at how pathetic I sounded, but I needed to know. There was a pause, and I could hear her shifting uncomfortably on the other end of the line. Why are you asking me this? Just tell me the truth, Sarah, please. Another pause, then a sigh. Look, Nate, I wasn't going to say anything because I didn't want to stir up trouble, but, yeah, I've noticed some things, the way they look at each other, the way she lights up when he's around. I thought maybe I was imagining it, or that it was harmless. I didn't think it was my place to say anything. My throat tightened. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me? She asked gently. You and Lauren seemed solid. I didn't think it was my business to get involved. I wanted to argue, to tell her that maybe if she'd said something, I could have stopped it, but the truth was, she was probably right. Even now, with evidence in my pocket, I could barely wrap my head around it. Do you know who might have sent me a photo of them? I asked after a moment. A photo, she repeated, her voice sharp with surprise. What photo? I quickly described the grainy image, leaving out the timestamp and the details of their embrace. Sarah was silent for a long time before she finally said, I didn't send it, Nate, but there's someone else you might want to talk to. Who? Riley, she said, her tone uncertain. Riley was another mutual friend, someone who'd been close to both Lauren and me for years. She was blunt, fiercely loyal, and had no problem calling people out on their bullshit, but she'd also been a little distant lately, always making excuses when I invited her over or tried to catch up. At the time, I'd assumed she was just busy. Now I wasn't so sure. Why Riley? I pressed. She saw something a while back, Sarah admitted. I don't know the details, but she mentioned that she'd caught Adam and Lauren acting off. She wouldn't tell me what she saw, but she was pretty upset about it. I clenched my jaw, my mind racing. Riley knew something. Maybe she'd even been the one to send the photo. Thanks, Sarah, I said quietly. I'll talk to her. Please be careful, Nate, Sarah said, her voice laced with concern. I'm so sorry you're going through this. I ended the call and stared at my phone for a moment, debating whether to reach out to Riley now or wait until I could think more clearly. But patience had never been my strong suit. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I dialed Riley's number, my heart pounding as the phone rang. She picked up on the third ring. Nate, she said, her voice cautious. This is unexpected. Riley, I need to ask you something, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Do you know anything about Lauren and Adam? There was a pause so long I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she sighed. I was hoping you'd never find out like this. Her words confirmed everything. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. You knew, I whispered. You knew, and you didn't tell me. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know how to tell you, but when I saw them together. What did you see? I interrupted, my voice rising. She hesitated again. I saw them kissing. Nate, it was a few months ago, at a party. I confronted Lauren about it afterward, but she begged me not to tell you. She said it was a mistake, that it wouldn't happen again. And you believed her, I spat. I didn't know what to believe, she shot back, but when I realized it wasn't stopping, I had to do something. So it was you, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. You sent the photo. Another long pause. Then, yes. My head spun as the truth settled over me. Riley had seen what I hadn't. She'd tried to warn me in the only way she could, and now I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. Thanks for telling me, I said finally, my voice hollow. Nate, I'm so sorry, she said softly, but I didn't have the energy to respond. I hung up, staring out the diner window as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. My wife had betrayed me, my brother had betrayed me, and now, even my friends had been forced into the mess they'd created. My life was unraveling, thread by painful thread, and I still didn't know how it would end. I spent that night in my car, parked at some empty lot outside of town. The air was cold, biting even, but I didn't care. It felt like the chill was the only thing keeping me grounded. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photo, Lauren in Adam's arms, his hands on her in ways that should have been reserved for me. And now, thanks to Riley, I had confirmation. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an isolated lapse in judgment. This was calculated, deliberate, and months in the making. What gnawed at me even more was Lauren's pathetic attempt to cover her tracks by swearing to Riley it was a one-time mistake. If that wasn't bad enough, Adam's smug confession at the table that morning had sealed the deal. By the time I pulled into my driveway the next morning, I wasn't sure if I was ready to face them, but I knew I couldn't run forever. The house felt different as I walked inside, heavier, like it was suffocating me. Lauren's car was in the driveway, but Adam's wasn't. I wasn't sure if that was a blessing or not. Lauren was in the kitchen, still in her bathrobe, a cup of coffee trembling in her hands. She looked up when I walked in, her face a mix of relief and fear. "You came back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," I replied coldly, dropping my keys on the counter. "We need to talk." She nodded and gestured toward the dining table, the same place where Adam had so casually confessed to the affair, the same place where I'd seen them laughing together just yesterday. I stayed standing. Sitting felt too close to normal, and nothing about this was normal anymore. "How long?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. "And I want the real answer this time, Lauren, not the sugar-coated bullshit you told Riley." Her eyes widened. "You talked to Riley?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, I talked to Riley," I snapped, "and I know she's the one who sent the photo, so don't even think about lying to me again." Lauren's shoulders slumped, and for the first time since this all started, she looked completely defeated. "It's been 6 months, she admitted, her voice breaking. 6 months, half a year of deception, half a year of them sneaking around, lying to my face, and pretending everything was fine. The weight of it settled on my chest like a boulder. "Why?" I asked, my voice softer now, but no less sharp. "Why him, Lauren? Why my brother?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know, Nate, I really don't. It started as nothing, just harmless flirting. I didn't think it would go anywhere, but then you decided betraying me was worth it." I finished for her. Her sobs grew louder, and for a moment, I thought she might try to deny it, but she didn't. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "Never meant to hurt me." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "You've been sneaking around with my brother for half a year, Lauren. Do you think it doesn't hurt because you didn't mean for it to?" She wiped her face with the sleeve of her robe, her voice shaking. "I was unhappy, Nate. I felt like we were just existing, like we'd stopped trying to make each other happy a long time ago." "And Adam made you happy?" I asked, my voice dripping with venom. "Was it worth destroying everything we built? Was it worth tearing this family apart?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, staring at the table like a child caught stealing candy. The sound of tires crunching gravel outside broke the tense silence. I glanced out the window and saw Adam's car pulling into the driveway. Of course, he couldn't stay away. The audacity of him showing up after everything made my blood boil. I turned to Lauren, who looked panicked. "You invited him here?" I asked, incredulous. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I didn't." "Convenient," I muttered, marching to the front door. Adam stepped out of his car as I flung the door open. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his posture that set me off, like he thought he could just walk in and smooth things over. "You've got some nerve showing up here," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Nate, I think we need to talk," Adam said, shoving his hands into his pockets like this was some casual misunderstanding. "Oh, we're going to talk," I said, stepping onto the porch and slamming the door behind me, "but I'm not sure you're going to like what I have to say." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "I get it. Okay, you're pissed. You have every right to be, but..." "There's no but, Adam," I shouted, my anger finally breaking through the surface. "You didn't just sleep with someone's wife. You slept with my wife. You betrayed me in a way I didn't even think was possible. And now you want to what? Explain yourself." Adam flinched but quickly recovered, his expression hardening. "Look, Nate, I didn't plan for this to happen." "Stop saying that," I yelled. "You both keep acting like this was some accident, like you tripped and fell into each other's arms, but it wasn't. You made a choice, Adam, over and over again, for 6 goddamn months." He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't done. "You were my brother," I said, my voice breaking. "I trusted you, and you threw that away for what? A fling, a cheap thrill." For the first time, Adam looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he said quietly. "But it did," I said, stepping closer. "And now I have to figure out how to put my life back together while you get to walk away and play the victim." Adam had no response to that. He just stood there, his eyes darting away like he couldn't face the mess he'd made. I stared at him for a long moment, my chest heaving. "Get off my property," I finally said, my voice icy, "and don't come back." He hesitated, as if he was about to argue, but the look in my eyes must have convinced him otherwise. Without another word, he turned and got back in his car. The tires squealed as he backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the road. I stood there for a long time, the cold air biting at my skin. Inside, Lauren was still crying. Outside, Adam was gone, and I was left alone with the ruins of what used to be my life. The house was quiet when I went back inside. Lauren was still at the dining table, her head in her hands, crying softly. I didn't feel pity, though. All I felt was emptiness, the kind that comes when you realize everything you thought you could rely on was just an illusion. I sat across from her, keeping the table between us, needing the distance. She looked up when she heard the chair scrape, her tear-streaked face full of something I couldn't place. Was it regret, guilt, shame? It didn't matter. Nothing she could say or feel would undo what she and Adam had done. "Lauren," I began, my voice low and steady, "we need to talk about what happens next." Her lip trembled as she nodded. "I know. I don't even know where to start." "Start with why you stayed," I said coldly. "If you've been so unhappy, why didn't you just leave? Why drag me through this?" Her shoulders slumped, and she looked away. "Because I didn't want to lose what we had. Nate, I didn't want to lose you." I barked out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and jagged. "You didn't want to lose me, so instead, you carried on with my brother behind my back for 6 months. That's one hell of a way to hold on to someone." "I know I messed up," she said, her voice shaking. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I never stopped loving you." "Don't," I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. She jumped, startled by the sudden noise. "Don't say you love me. Don't cheapen the word like that. What you did wasn't love, Lauren. It was selfishness, plain and simple." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. She wasn't the victim here. If she wanted sympathy, she'd have to find it somewhere else. "I need space," I said finally, my voice calmer now. "I can't be around you right now. I'm going to stay somewhere else for a while." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "No, please, don't go, Nate. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes, counseling, therapy, anything. Just don't leave." "You don't get to ask me for anything," I said firmly, standing up. "Not after what you've done." She reached for me, but I stepped back, avoiding her touch like it burned. "I mean it, Lauren. I need time to think, to figure out if there's even anything left to save." "And if there isn't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked at her, my heart heavy. "Then you and Adam got exactly what you wanted." Without waiting for her response, I turned and headed upstairs to pack a bag. I wasn't sure where I was going, but anywhere was better than here. I grabbed a few essentials, clothes, my laptop, my toothbrush, and stuffed them into a duffel. As I zipped it up, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Riley. "Are you okay? I've been worried about you." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Not really, but thanks for asking." Her reply came almost instantly. "If you need a place to stay, my guest room is always open." I hesitated. Riley had been a friend for years, someone I trusted, but after everything that had happened, trust felt like a fragile thing. Still, the thought of being in a familiar, safe place was tempting. "Thanks, I might take you up on that." "Anytime," she wrote back, "just let me know." I slung the bag over my shoulder and headed back downstairs. Lauren was still at the table, her face buried in her hands. She didn't look up as I walked past her and out the door. The drive to Riley's house was quiet, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional rumble of passing cars. When I arrived, she was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a cardigan, her face full of concern. She opened the door before I could knock. "Nate," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "Come in, you look exhausted." I didn't respond, I just walked inside, setting my bag down by the door. Riley closed it behind me and gestured toward the living room. "Sit, I'll get you something to drink." She returned a few minutes later with a glass of whiskey, which I accepted gratefully. She sat down across from me, watching me carefully but saying nothing. For the first time in what felt like days, I exhaled. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice rough. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "I just want to make sure you're okay." "I'm not," I admitted, "but I will be, eventually." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Riley didn't push for details, and I appreciated that. For now, I just needed space to breathe. But deep down, I knew the hardest part was still to come. The fallout from Lauren and Adam's betrayal was far from over, and the path ahead was uncertain. All I could do now was take it one step at a time, and hope I could piece my life back together. Staying at Riley's house gave me a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in days. The quiet was different from the silence at home, less suffocating, more freeing. Riley didn't ask for details, though I could tell she wanted to. She gave me space but made it clear she was there if I needed her. It was exactly what I needed, somewhere safe to think, to feel, and to decide what came next. A week passed before I contacted Lauren. I'd ignored her texts and calls, letting them pile up without a second glance. Each one begged for forgiveness, pleaded for a chance to fix what she'd broken. I wasn't ready to face her, but the legalities of marriage demanded attention: the house, the finances, and the decision about whether this would end in divorce. The meeting wasn't dramatic, nor was it emotional. I asked her to meet me at a coffee shop in the city, public enough to keep things civil, private enough to say what needed saying. She was already there when I arrived, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Her face looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't care. I sat down across from her and ordered a black coffee, keeping my gaze steady. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice barely audible over the chatter of other customers. "I'm not here for small talk," I said flatly. "Let's get to it." She flinched but nodded, reaching into her bag to pull out a manila folder. "I've been looking into mediators," she began. If you're ready to talk about dividing assets." I raised an eyebrow. "So, you're assuming this is over?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Isn't it?" she asked, her voice breaking. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to summon the part of me that used to love her, the part that might have forgiven her, even after everything, but it was gone, buried under the weight of betrayal. "It is," I said finally, my voice steady. "You and Adam made sure of that." She nodded slowly, her tears spilling over. "I don't blame you," she whispered. "I hate myself for what I did. I hate what I've done to us. If I could take it back." "But you can't," I interrupted. "And honestly, Lauren, I don't think you would." "Not really, because if you truly regretted it, it wouldn't have lasted 6 months. It wouldn't have taken a photo for me to find out." She didn't argue, just sat there crying into her coffee. I didn't feel bad for her. Maybe I would one day, but not today. "I'll contact a lawyer," I said, standing up. "We'll figure out the rest through mediation." "Nate," she said, her voice desperate, "please, can we at least?" "No," I cut her off, cold and final. "We can't. You and Adam destroyed that possibility. This is the end." I walked out without another word. 2 months later, the divorce papers were signed. Lauren moved out of the house and into a small apartment across town. I learned through mutual friends that Adam had disappeared, retreating to some rental in another state. I didn't care enough to follow up. Riley remained a constant in my life, her friendship unwavering. She was my sounding board when the anger resurfaced, my safe place when the loneliness crept in. Over time, that friendship turned into something else, something I hadn't expected. It wasn't love, not at first, but it was honest and kind. 2 things I desperately needed. The day the divorce was finalized, Riley and I sat on her porch, sharing a bottle of wine. The paperwork felt heavy in my hands, but it was also a relief. "Feels weird, doesn't it?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah," I said, staring out at the fading sunset. "Weird, but right." She nodded, taking a sip of her wine. "You deserve better, you know." "I'm starting to believe that," I said, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. The pain was still there, but it was duller now, a scar instead of a wound. I'd lost a lot, but I'd also gained something: clarity, strength, and the realization that I was worth more than the lies I'd been fed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I said. Riley clinked her glass against mine, her smile warm and genuine. "To better endings." And for the first time, I truly believed the worst was behind me.